Dear Muse, the most annoying advice I get from other writers is this: you just have to be okay with a messy first draft. Don't try to make it perfect. Just write the damn book and edit later. And I get it. I understand what they mean, but I am a perfectionist. I want to have a good first draft. What is wrong with that? Honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong in wanting to have a good first draft and to feel like you're good at writing. What does become a problem is the amount of expectations put on a first draft, especially if this is your first time writing. But before we move any further, let's take a deep breath. Clench your jaw, roll your shoulders back, let them fall as they may, and let's get right into it. The first question I want to ask you is this: what do I mean when I say I want to have a good first draft? When writers, especially new writers, say that, they often want their story to sound polished with no grammatical errors, or they want it to resemble to a finished book, or they want some proof that they are capable of being a writer. And most of all, they want to feel like the time and emotional effort they invested in writing this story was worth it. In other words, the first draft is expected to be good enough to sit on a shelf. That's like asking someone who has never shot an arrow before to be able to shoot a bullseye. A little bit unrealistic. When you ask a more experienced writer what they mean by a good first draft, they'll say things like the story structure has to be there, or the emotional journey of the character is clear, or there's a few strong scenes that won't need much revision, or they're cutting scenes instead of adding more scenes. Notice the difference. New writers define good as finished and polished, while experienced writers define good as functional and workable. They're talking about completely different things. So when you hear this kind of advice, the problem isn't that you can't have a good first draft. The problem is that you're asking your first draft to do the work of your final draft. A first draft was never meant to do that kind of a job. It exists for the writer and only for the writer. I want you to sit with this question for a moment. What am I hoping to accomplish by writing my first draft? A lot of writers want a good first draft because they want reassurance. They want proof that they're capable of writing a story. They want proof that they're able to write the story and that it's worth writing. And they want to trust in themselves before they even had the chance to explore. And that's not really about the writing craft. It's more about safety. And listen, there's nothing wrong in wanting to have a safety net. It is very human. But storytelling is about exploration. It's about discovery. And if you cling too tightly to that safety net, you miss out on discovering who you are as a writer and how powerful your storytelling can be. Which brings us to the part that everybody hates hearing. Yes, you do need to have your first draft to be messy. And yeah, that sucks. It sucks because it's triggering. Words like messy, bad, not perfect hits very deeply for people who have insecurities or trauma around perfectionism. So when a well-meaning writer comes around and advises you to write messy and let it be bad, your villain, that inner critic voice in your head, shows up and tells you that they are wrong. They are wrong because you learned early on that mistakes equals consequences. So instead of hearing it's just a draft, your villain is saying danger, and your nervous system kicks in to try and protect you. And suddenly you're stuck. You either try to prove everyone wrong by drafting a perfect first draft, or you freeze completely because you don't know how to move forward, and eventually leads to the road of quitting. And the more that the advice gets repeated, the more frustrating it becomes because they don't understand how terrifying that means to you. Messy first drafts are bad because you see gaps. Where there's gaps, there's imperfection. When there's imperfections, you go straight to failure. Failure is punishment, and punishment equals pain. But I'm here to tell you, your first draft does not need to be messy, at least not in the sense that you might think of. Yes, it feels a discomfort, but that isn't failure, that is growth. Let's reframe this more gently. A first draft is not a reflection of your performance, it is a reflection of your story's potential. The goal of a first draft isn't quality, it is to create a symbol of what your story will become. It is the first layer of your story coming alive. Think of it like primer for paint, or a rehearsal for a dance recital, or a baby's first steps before they learn how to run. Of course, the first draft feels wrong. Your brain is working faster than your fingers. Stories, especially characters, are complex, so details are going to be missing. Emotions won't land properly, and that's normal. So instead of asking yourself, why can't I have a good first draft? It has to be a good first draft. Try asking yourself, what does my first draft tell me about who I am as a writer? Do I favor certain phrases or words? Do I lean heavier on dialogue and avoid description? Do I rush the climax and totally forget about the middle? Do I struggle to let the emotions live in the scene? Your first draft isn't failing you. It's showing you how your brain translates your story into words. Your first draft doesn't need to be messy. It just needs to be right for you. For me, the big lesson is, yes, I'm a perfectionist, but I'm also incredibly impatient. By chapter 2, I've already finished the story in my head and I just want it to be done. The most frustrating part about writing is that my imagination works faster than my fingers and my brain just can't spit out the right words needed. And when it can't spit out the right words, that's when I completely shut down and I'm unable to write. What I learned is that descriptions slow me down. I need time and a thesaurus to help me describe my scenes. Emotional depth also slows me down. I like to use a lot of adverbs and go straight to the point, like he's sad, but that's more telling than showing. What I do like is dialogue, action, and foreshadowing. Those come easily to me. So my first drafts only focused on those things. And yes, my first draft lacked a lot of story elements. And if someone would read it, they'd say it'd be terrible, but that's not the point. The point is that my first draft contained the elements that I needed to build the foundation of my story. Later drafts handled all the description and the emotional narrative. And I gave each draft a specific job so that way I felt accomplished each time. Here's a tool to carry with you. When you are finishing a writing session for your first draft and hate what you wrote, instead of deleting anything, instead, add a comment and ask yourself, what is it about this that I hate? And why did I write it in the first place? Because there is a reason. It's either an emotion or a moment that you're trying to capture, but whatever it is going to take time to develop it. So instead of feeling like you have to delete everything and start from scratch, consider it as a placeholder. Placeholders are valid, especially in drafts. Your first draft is you telling the story to yourself. It's the bridge between what you've outlined and what your story will become. But here are some grounding reminders to keep nearby in case that perfectionism starts to kick in. The goal of this draft is about clarity, not quality. These words are just placeholders. I can't edit what doesn't exist. And my personal favorite, these are drafts. I will share them when I'm ready. And if you like journaling, which I think you should do, it's a great tool to have, here's a reflection question of the week. What expectations am I placing on my first draft that should belong to a later stage? Just notice it and write it down. It's okay to be frustrated with your first draft. It's hard turning our imagination into words for other people to imagine. And that frustration exists because you care, because writing is meaningful and complex. I'm not going to tell you your first draft needs to be messy, and I'm not going to tell you that your first draft needs to be good. Your first draft needs to be good enough for you to keep going. And you're doing better than you think. And we'll take this one breath, one word, and one draft at a time. This was Dear Muse. And if you're struggling with writing, leave a comment with hashtag Dear Muse, and maybe your question will be in a future episode. Or, buy a new notebook.